sitting on my doorstep, the people's passing by. They're coming back from getting wrecked. Everybody's high. Saturday night, what a bitch, laying on the lawn. The morning comes to bring the switch after the buzz is gone.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Addictions, the podcast about addictions. I'm your host, David Wagner. On today's episode, we welcome a very special guest, Joshua Shea, author of the book, The Addiction No One Is Talking About. It is available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and pretty much everywhere else that you find books. And I'm going to say, after reading this book, I became much more informed on the issue of pornography addiction. Josh and I had a fantastic conversation about the growing epidemic of pornography and sexual addictions. This is somewhat of a taboo subject, and Josh really hit the nail on the head with the title of the book. It's something that very few people are talking about, but it has been growing exponentially over the past century, really. And if we do not address it, it is likely that it will surpass many other addictions. This type of an addiction can really get out of hand if we do not talk about it. One thing that I found incredibly refreshing about Josh's story is that he really owns and feels 100% responsible for his actions in the past, and is doing everything that he can to now educate people on the subject of addiction to pornography. In researching this episode, I found that over 25% of search engine queries involved pornography. This is really a staggering number when you realize how many people are using the internet. Now, I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with checking out pornography, from time to time, but it can become a very slippery slope and lead to much more dire consequences. One thing I'd like to let everyone know is that no matter what our addictions, we are all human, and no one deserves to be cast out of society because of something that happened in the past. People can change for the better, and I firmly believe that. And Joshua is a shining example of this, so I urge you all to check out his book because it really shines a light on the subject. Before we get to my discussion with Josh, I want to let everyone know that I recently set up a PayPal account so that you can do a one-time donation of any amount to help us out at the Addictions Podcast, keep the lights on and the studio running. Just visit our Facebook page and you will find the link for that. Any size donations is greatly appreciated, and unlike our Patreon donation page, the PayPal setup does not require a monthly payment. It is a one-time donation type of thing. You can easily find the site by visiting www.paypal.me/theaddictionspodcast. And thank you all so very much. Now on with the show. On this episode of Addictions, we're speaking with Joshua Shea, author of the book, The Addiction Nobody Will Talk About, How I Let My Pornography Addiction Hurt People and Destroy Relationships. Now, pornography and or sex addictions, they really do seem to be addictions that we seldom hear about or even talk about, just like the title of your book says, Josh. I think this is due to the kind of taboo nature of the subject. But they are addictions, and they are something that I totally agree that we desperately need to be talking about. I want to thank you right off the bat for coming on the show, Joshua. Like I said earlier when we were speaking, I really appreciate it. This will be our first episode on this subject, so let's get rolling.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here because, whether it's drugs or alcohol or gambling or food or sex or porn, addiction is addiction is addiction is addiction. And people need to know about it.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Now, you actually had kind of a cross addiction going on.
Yes. Really, since 13, 14 years old, I've been addicted to porn. And since probably 16, 17, I have been an alcoholic. So I've used both of those as coping mechanisms and crutches all through the years, and really did a pretty good job of hiding the fact that I was addicted to both.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I don't think that's uncommon. I mean, when I look at my own addiction in the past, the same exact issues, I kept it a secret for a long time.
Well, addicts are great liars. That's
Yes.
that's one of those things that, and it doesn't matter what your substance or behavior was. We all know how to manipulate people. We all know how to skirt around tough issues. We're great politicians. We're great lawyers. We're great debaters. We know how to, we're magicians. And don't look over here while I do something else over here. And, somebody with a porn addiction is exactly the same way.
Yeah, yeah. Now you were actually a successful magazine publisher into politics, involved in the arts and culture in the state of Maine.
Yes. Yes, I was the creator of a lifestyle magazine
Yeah.
in Central Maine. I There'd never been one before, and while Central Maine isn't exactly the hotbed of arts and culture and dining in the world, we have our fair share of different things going on. So I thought a magazine that was glossy and made people feel good about where they came from and maybe was a little bit higher quality than they're familiar with would be a real nice thing. And I have a long history in journalism. Thankfully, I was absolutely right. I had a 5-year plan that had reached its conclusion after 3 months because it took off so fast and so big because of how big that magazine became and how even though I'd been around the area for 25, 30 years professionally, I was seen as an overnight success, and I was able to parlay that into a seat on my city council. And I was also able to have the resources to launch one of the largest film festivals that Maine had seen to that
Oh
point.
wow, that's awesome. I've always been interested in journalism, and to be honest, through reading your book, especially in the very beginning of the book, you talk a lot about how you started the magazine, and I learned some stuff by reading the book. I just want to say, excellent job on the book, Josh. It's I
Thank
couldn't
you.
stop. I couldn't put it down.
And I try to let people know, I can quote statistics all day long and I can give you how to advice about porn addiction. But that's not what this book is about. You saw it. The book is a straight ahead memoir. I'm like a lot of people who are addicts in that I don't think I respond to being lectured at. I don't respond to somebody throwing numbers at me because, like most addicts, I think I'm unique and special. So the numbers don't apply to me. The way I learn and the way I gather information is usually from hearing stories. So I wanted to write a book that the average addict could look at and maybe see me in their reflection and recognize that they had a problem and they need to take care of it before it reached the point that mine did. And the other reason I wrote the book was hopefully people who don't know anything about porn addiction or people who want to learn a little bit more. This is a good entry to it because I think there's one statistic in the entire book. It really is just a story about a guy who first hit it big and then absolutely, like a black hole, imploded upon
Yeah, yeah.
himself.
The bomb dropped out, and when you get to brass tacks, you got to face the music eventually. I think we all do. And, it's great that you are doing that and being so open about it because we do need to start a dialogue, a national dialogue about this. Because, like you said earlier when we were speaking before we started recording, this isn't creeping up on us, it's already here.
No, absolutely. And, it seems like everybody is talking about the opioid crisis right now. Last 2, 3 years, it's all been about the opioid crisis. And I'm not going to compare it on a physical level to pornography. Obviously, it does so much more physical damage, but you can go back and watch TV from the 60s, cop shows like Dragnet. You'll see episodes where they talk about the dangers of heroin. You can go back to rap songs of the late 80s, early 90s. 20, 25 years ago, Eminem was rapping about abusing Vicodin. It's not like the opioid crisis snuck up on us. We saw it coming a long time ago, but we live in a very reactive society, not a proactive society. You can't tell me that 6 months ago sexual harassment just started in the workplace, but that's all you can hear about now. You can't tell me that 10 years ago bullying just started happening in schools, but for some reason that's when we started caring. The pornography addiction scourge that is coming for not just the United States. It's going to happen in
Yeah.
the world. If you look at statistics, it's scary because people who are under 30, especially men under 30, 1 out of 3 identifies as potentially having a pornography addiction. That's scary because those guys who are now 25 or 30, well, they're going to be 45 and 50, and they're going to be 70 and 75. And if we don't take care of this problem and we don't start reacting to it for 20 or 30 years, 1 out of 3 men in our country is going to have a pornography issue. And you tell me what that kind of society looks like. It doesn't sound like it's a healthy
No, it
one.
does not. And a lot of people might say or think that, well, how can you become addicted to watching pornography? But to be honest with you, Joshua, I myself, I am not gonna pussyfoot around it. I've watched porn, I mean, on several occasions. But yeah, oh yeah,
Oh my God, really? Yeah, everybody has.
I can
Yeah.
say that it does kind of have an addictive quality to it. I mean, I have an addictive personality, but
As do I.
it does kind of seem like it would be something that is easy to fall into, especially if you have prior existing mental health issues or other addictions going on like yourself. You combine all of those things and it's easy to see how a person can fall into it.
Right. And as you read in the book, I was diagnosed as bipolar in my mid 20s. I think a lot of my eventual crash had to do with the fact that I pulled myself off of my bipolar meds. I think that's why I started using alcohol and pornography even more during that last critical phase. But I can go back and like I mentioned in the book, I was the kid who needed to collect the most baseball cards. I was the kid who needed to get through Super Mario quicker than anybody. I've always had a obsessive, addictive personality. We have a casino near my house, and my wife and I will go maybe once every 6, 8 weeks, have some dinner, and then play slot machines. And I get angry when I lose $40 and I'm ready to leave right then and there. However, I can see how if you were standing at a roulette table or you started putting a penny in, or then you went to a nickel, then you went to a dime, I can absolutely see how gambling would be so addictive. I can see how it would escalate and grow out of control quickly. I don't have that gambling addict gene, but it's one of those things where I have to watch out for anything that could be an addiction because, like you, I have that personality.
It's I think once you've been through any addiction and come back, you've got to stay on your toes.
It's recovery is an active thing. I actually had a therapist appointment today, and I said to her, I think that, and I've been in and out of therapy for 20 years. I told her, it's only since I really have entered recovery 3, 4 years ago that I recognize that cognitive behavioral therapy is just recovery for everybody, but I kept waiting for you to give me some magic bullet to live my life. And you can't do that. It's you have to live your life every day looking at your motivations, looking at why you do things, looking at how your body is naturally reacting to things, and if it's troubling, figuring out why, and then figuring out how to avoid dealing with situations with those crutches of addiction.
Exactly. With the opioids, my own addiction, it was because I just, I was depressed. I wanted to get out of my emotional state that I was in, and the opioids opened that door for me, so to speak.
Absolutely. They numb us and then they make us high. And it isn't just with things that are, physically will do that to you. It is with gambling. It is with food. It is with sex. It's about having that dopamine hit.
Exactly. And at the end of the day, that's exactly what it is. I mean, we know a lot about the brain, but there are some mysteries to it still. Uh, but clearly, with addiction, it is the reward system that is being acted on, and it feels good. That's people wouldn't become addicted if it wasn't doing something for them. I think we need to look on an individual basis. We all need to kind of look at our own issues and address what we're running from or what we're trying to hide from. If we want to really get to the bottom of our own personal addictions.
Well, and I saw something recently that said 90% of drug and alcohol users had some kind of trauma or abuse
Yeah.
before they turned 12 years old. That doesn't say everybody who becomes addicted had that happen, but 9 out of 10 did. Um, their crutches, their coping mechanisms, as you read in my book, um, I feel like I created my survival skills when I was 5 or 6 years old, and never really had to call upon them until my businesses started imploding, and the coping skills of a 5 or 6 year old kid are not the ones that a 36, 37-year-old entrepreneur can really use to succeed.
Yeah. Well, you're totally right, and I think a lot of us do form a lot of our coping mechanisms at a young age, and if along the way we encounter trauma and those mechanisms are damaged in some way, we can encounter problems later on in life. Now, without giving too much away, about with the book, Josh, let's get into a little bit about what happened, basically. Now, you were in the public eye clearly when everything went down, but how did everything happen?
Well, like I said, I had struggled with alcohol and porn going back to being a teenager. There were times where I
Mhm.
used a lot, and times I barely touched the stuff over those years. Um, my businesses, after being around 4 or 5 years, they weren't the new hip thing anymore. So, we plateaued business wise, and I'm not a great businessman. While our income started to be steady, our expenses kept going up. And I started getting really freaked out because we had employees, we have rent. This is not a cheap organization that we're operating. And I could see that if I didn't figure out how to fix things or change things around, we were going to be in some real trouble. This started weighing on me, and I thought about, in the past how I've been in some, tough situations running different publications, not necessarily owning them, but running them. And I realized that back before I was diagnosed bipolar, it was my manic side that got me out of those situations, or at least that's what I reminisced, and that's the nostalgia of, the mania. And I thought to myself, well, if I pull myself off of my medication, it will allow me to just hit that manic side. I'll be able to be awake 20 hours a day. I'll figure out these problems. I will save the company. Everything's going to be good. Well, that just was, probably the dumbest thing I ever thought. Because almost immediately, one of the things when I am off of my meds, my sense of consequences and cause and effect gets much fuzzier. That's one of the things that I noticed really improved when I got on the meds back in my mid 20s. And I had a tremendous amount of stress happening at work. Pulling myself off those meds, I needed something. So I went from drinking once a day to drinking 3 or 4 times a day. I went from looking at maybe 20 or 30 minutes of porn in the evening to looking at an hour, then looking at 2 hours. Then I made the jump over to chat rooms, and I was in them for 2 or 3 hours a night. And I figured out, through the help of a nefarious character online, how to bypass my webcam and put up a video of a younger, better looking guy who looked like he was just typing away on his computer. And by doing this, the women that I ran into in the middle of the night, a lot of them would, start
Yeah.
dropping little hints of thinking the guy was sexy and moving it to a sexy conversation. And while we're talking, they think they're talking to me. They think they see me.
Yeah.
What I'm actually doing is mining them for information. So then I'm on the other half of the screen. And, if they happen to say, I love horses, or they, mention something, and I'm able to track down their Facebook page and I see them riding horses and doing competitive jumping, well, suddenly I can start talking about how my sister is in competitive horse jumping, and they get all excited, and it's a combination of grooming and cold reading that you see fake psychics do. Um, you build that rapport with them, and you get women who, uh, you know, I would think otherwise would not become that vulnerable and not do things like remove their clothes or satisfy themselves sexually on a webcam. You get them starting to do that because you've built that trust with them. And that was really about control. And that's
Yeah.
where things
Yeah.
started going really awry because I was losing control in my regular life. The only place that I had control in those waning days was when I was online in the middle of the night talking to these women. And when I would get to the end of one of these sessions with a woman, I would usually take one or two screen captures and throw them into a folder as a trophy. I didn't use those for sexual gratification because I've got the whole internet. I can go find porn anywhere. This is more of a trophy. This is a symbol of my accomplishment. Well, I was not sleeping, not taking my pills, drunk most of the time that I was doing this, and I did not show. I mean, it was a horrible thing to be doing, but I didn't show any regard for anybody, and that led to me ending up talking to a underage girl who
Exactly.
looked sexually mature to me, but I was in such a state I wasn't asking
Yeah.
questions. As long as they looked sexually mature, that was good enough for me. And that isn't good enough for the law, thankfully. And about 3-4 months after I talked to one particular female, the Maine State Police showed up at my door with a search warrant for my computers, and I knew that life as I knew it was over. And while that was a very scary thing, that was probably the thing that saved my life, because had that intervention of the authorities not happened, I only give even odds that I'd be here talking to you right now, because something was going to give. I could just recognize that physically, mentally, something was going to give if a massive intervention didn't happen. And, you know, thank God the police showed up at my door.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, I can totally relate, Joshua, to what you're saying, especially the, not caring or not really worrying about the age of these women. With my own addiction, there was so much excuse making or justifying what I was doing. Oh, I can spend this money on these pills this week because next week I'll have this money, and that's the behavior. That's exactly the behavior of the addict.
Yeah, and it's, if as long as they look sexually mature, they must be sexually mature. Mentally, they're sexually mature. It doesn't matter, and that's absolutely not true, because I'm sure that there were probably women who were 23 or
Yeah, yeah,
24 years old that I clicked past who looked like they were 15, and then this girl was 14 years old and she looked older than that. And that shows you the absolute fallacy of decision making when you're stuck in an addiction like that. And I don't blame the addiction for what I did. I stopped taking those pills on my own. I allowed my mental health to deteriorate. I entered those rooms every evening and talked to those people and took those pictures. I don't try to minimize or rationalize what I did, because what I did was horrible. It was wrong. I deserved to go to jail for 6 months. But it was one of those things where at the time, I didn't think of any consequences that might happen.
yeah. Well, I think that when people listen to this and hear your story, Joshua, that they're going to find it refreshing that you own this. You do take responsibility. And
Well, and I'm in a weird position because I was so well known. You read in the book that I drive home from jail with my wife after she bailed me out, and we get home to a TV news van in front of my house. That's we had to hide from TV news vans two other times that day. It was a surreal kind of thing, and at the time I didn't realize, and it took me a long time to accept it when the media was hounding me outside of the courtroom when I'd go for a hearing or something like that. But everything that I did is out there. I mean, not just in the public record, but in the media. I can't really hide what I did. And most guys who either have taken an addiction to a criminal level like I did, or just have a strong addiction, it's a shameful thing. It's a thing they want to hide. Well, my skeletons are all out there. And I realized while I was actually sitting in jail that since everything about me is already out there, I'll own the shame, I'll own the embarrassment. And coming on
yeah,
a show like this, I'm getting better about talking about it, but I still, really don't love talking about this
yeah,
stuff.
yeah,
It brings shame to me. It does make me feel embarrassed. It makes me wonder, what the hell I was thinking. But nobody has stepped up and done this yet. And when I started seeing statistics about pornography addiction, and I started to hear from people in jail who had questions to me about sex addiction, about porn addiction, I realized that there needs to be something out there. And, I'd love everybody in the world to read this. I'd love everybody in the world to know about this. I can only do so much, but if I'm sitting on my hands, I can't do anything. So I'll put this out into the world and hopefully, however, if I don't know if that girl was the only one who was under 18 I talked to. The police at first thought that there was three. They were only able to confirm one. However many victims I had, hopefully by doing this, there will be more people who are saved or more people who don't reach that point of addiction that they create victims. And it's that kind of thing you can never measure. But if I'm able to help or save more people than I hurt, then maybe this was all for a net good. Maybe my life wasn't supposed to be about making a magazine, or it wasn't supposed about being a local politician and beloved by everybody. Maybe this is what I was actually supposed to be here for, and it's all part of a journey. And I should try to make the best of it, even if sometimes these lines of questioning are hard and they're embarrassing and they're tough to talk about. But it's important. It's important enough for me to just swallow my pride and go ahead and do this.
yeah, yeah. And that's the exact reason that I started this podcast, Josh. I wanted to. There's so many reasons, but I mean, I wanted to give people a voice. I wanted to own my own story of addiction. I wanted to allow people to hear that and hopefully garner some good from it. And to be honest with you, talking about this sort of stuff, I know that it can be hard for some of us, but I really believe that it is therapeutic in many ways.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It's therapeutic. I mean, I don't think it would hurt if it wasn't therapeutic. If I could do this as a robot, and I've done, quite a few
Yeah,
podcasts promoting this book, the day that it isn't hard to talk about this, there's something wrong. The day that there is no shame behind this, or I'm okay with what I did, and I'm telling my story about, I used to be really shameful about this, but this is okay now. That'll be the day that I stop doing this, because that means I need to go back into treatment. This is a process of healing, but it's not like healing a broken leg. It's about maintaining a condition like diabetes.
exactly. Yes. And it's a quest. I mean, I try to look at life as, life is a journey, and the only reward is the journey itself.
Right, because the only place we're going is death.
Yeah.
And that's not to be morbid, but really, that's, the journey is the only thing.
Exactly.
We don't get a gold key at, you know, once we reach that recovery point where we don't need to worry about it anymore. There is no trophy at the end of it. Uh, I've been to plenty of 12-step groups, Alcoholics Anonymous, Sex Addicts Anonymous, and you see those people who were there 25, 30, 40 years, and you first got there, and it's like, wow, I hope I don't have such a problem that I need to be here in 40 years. But once an alcoholic, once a sex addict, once an addict, always an addict. And you do what you have to do to maintain. And if that means in 40 years you're at 12 step groups, well, then you better go to 12 step groups.
Yeah, yeah. And it's a community, a lot of good can be taken from those types of groups. Now, I mean, will those groups work for everyone? Probably not. But the fact is that they do work for some people. You know.
Right. And there's I look at them the way that I look at a
Exactly.
lot of religion, where the specifics aren't always for people, but they do have some excellent ideas within that you can draw from. And that's one of the reasons, that I wrote this book, was about kind of a sense of fellowship, of you're not alone out there. I didn't know porn addiction was really a thing until after I got arrested and started to learn about it. I knew alcoholism was a thing, but again, nobody talks about porn addiction. Uh, I want people who have the problem to know they're not the only one out there, and that this is something that doctors have, and lawyers have, and teachers have, and plumbers have, and homeless people have, and old people have, and young people have. There is no stereotypical porn addict. It's across all socio-demographics, and they don't have to feel alone. There are people out there who also have this, and talking to them can be a huge help. And it's not going to cure you, because you're never going to be cured if you've altered your brain chemistry, but it does help so much just to know you've got other people out there who are going through the same things as you, or who have been through the same things as you.
Yeah, I agree. And related to this subject, here in Michigan, Michigan State University, they had Dr. Larry Nasser. It made national news, man.
I was going to say, not much bad press there lately.
Yeah, unreal how many people that he, victimized, but not justifying what he did by any means or anything like that. But I would be willing to bet that, he had some issues there.
Oh, I bet he has far-ranging issues, and he was able to abuse his place of power. Um, and when you're an addict and when you're sick, like we said earlier, you will manipulate, you will abuse your power. And he did it to a very, sick, and I hate to say the term evil, because I don't like to label things, evil or good.
Yeah,
I think he's a very sick person, and he deserves to be behind bars for the rest of his life. But I don't think this was a normal person walking the street who would check out with a perfect bill of mental
definitely
health.
not.
There's
Definitely.
people who do what he did, they're not well. And like you said, not to excuse what he did, he deserves to be behind bars for a long, long time. Much like I said, I think that I deserved a punishment for what I did. But their jails are full of people who have mental health issues.
Yeah, and that's really unfortunate. I think that's a big problem. I mean, the state of mental health care in this country, well, not even just in the United States, it's a problem everywhere. But it here in the U.S., it's a problem. We've I myself have struggled to find help. And that that can be a really big problem, because if you can't find help, obviously things are going to continue to spiral out of control.
Well, exactly. And I'll tell you, one of the things that a lot of sex offenders are facing right now is that municipalities are now passing residency restrictions in a lot of different places that if you're a sex offender, you can't live within 500 feet of a school or 1,000 feet of a daycare or whatever it is in that particular area. And unfortunately, what that does is it forces a lot of people out of inner cities who are of lower socioeconomic means, and that's where they actually will find the help as well, and they're forced actually away from the help. And there is no correlation and no study that has been done to find that proximity to where you live and what you live near has anything to do with sex offense, with any sex offense. It's actually been disproven time and time again, but it's one of those laws that people can get behind because it sounds like a good idea. It sounds like, yeah, a feel good kind of thing. But what you're actually doing is you're not saving anybody. You're hurting the person who needs the most help.
Yeah, it's counterintuitive. Totally.
Well, it is if you understand mental health issues. It is if you understand substance abuse issues and addiction. But for that, John Q. Public, who attaches just the word evil to anybody who has any type of sex crime against them, and won't think about the mental health side of things, won't think about why this person got to the place they were and what can we do to actually encourage them to become a more healthy, contributing member of society. They just want to shove them off and marginalize them. And that just makes things worse for a lot of those people. I'm thankfully, I've been married for 15, 16 years. My parents, my wife, my kids supported me through this process. I am a freelance writer, so I can work from home. I have a house. I'm very lucky. I also had the means to go to two inpatient rehabilitation centers. A lot of the men that I met in jail don't have those means, don't have those resources. And as a society, we really need to, and this is, goes far beyond just porn addiction or any addiction. It really goes to the core of mental health and the way that we treat it in this country. If you can't see the boo-boo, it's not really there, I think is still the opinion of most of the older, white men in power.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly. I've always kind of thought this, but the politicians, they are so detached from the common man and common woman, that how on earth can we expect them to adequately represent us? I mean, I'm not saying that I'm anti-government or anything like that. We obviously need government, but I feel like something's got to give.
Well, and I'm not casting dispersions on every politician, but the type of person who is driven to lead like that, um, they have, they're on the outer fringes of certain personality types as well. You can't tell me that you've not seen politicians who certainly have issues, whether it be keeping their sex life, together, or keeping their financial lives together. These are A lot of these are extreme personality types, and a lot of times when you have a problem with something, you run the other direction. I think I mentioned in my book, that there was that one senator from either Oregon or Washington who was the biggest fighter against gay rights, yet he's caught in an airport bathroom with a male prostitute. What I've really learned over the last few years is that a lot of times the people who scream the loudest about stuff are the ones who have the most to hide. And our politicians certainly do scream a lot.
Yes, they do. Yes, they do. Well, Josh, I want to thank you again for being on the show. Where can our listeners find your book?
Well, I like to drive people towards my website, which is recoveringpornaddict.com. There are links right on the homepage where you can buy the book online. You can also just, take yourself to Amazon, search my name, Joshua Shea, or The Addiction Nobody Will Talk About. But if you're curious about what's happened to me since the book, if you want more statistics, if you want more self-help, if you want more about recovery and what my recovery's been like, that's all available at recoveringpornaddict.com. And again, you can buy the book there.
Okay, awesome. I'm going to put a link up on the Addictions Podcast website and our Facebook page as well to your website so our listeners can find that. And thanks again for sending me a copy of the book. Yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I'm definitely going to leave you a review, Josh.
Appreciate that.
And I urge all of the listeners out there, check this thing out because it tells a really great story.
And let me just publicly applaud you, not for just getting into recovery and doing this podcast, but for giving people like me time. And you mentioned this is your first about porn addiction, and that's a really big deal, because for every person who will have me on a podcast or have me on a radio show, there are 5 who won't touch this with a 10-foot pole.
Yeah.
They understand it's a problem. They understand they need to deal with this, but God forbid we lose a sponsor. God forbid we lose a listener. And it's like, this is how we end up in bad places in this country, because it's a not in my backyard type situation. And you've invited me onto your show. We've been able to talk about pornography addiction. Neither of us burned up. Neither of us are going to hell. We had a good adult discussion, and more of those need to be happening across this world, or we're going to be in some trouble.
I thoroughly agree, man. And, I'd love to have you back on the show in the future, Josh. All I can say is keep up the good work, man.
Thank you so much. And like I said, I really appreciate you giving me this time tonight.
Awesome. Thanks, Josh. Again, the name of the book is The Addiction Nobody Will Talk About: How I Let My Pornography Addiction Hurt People and Destroy Relationships. Be sure and check that out. Once again, I want to thank Joshua Shea for coming on the show and sharing his story. I know it can't be easy to talk about these things, but I do truly believe that through talking about this kind of stuff, it can be incredibly therapeutic. I'd also like to thank all of you for listening. It really means a lot to me. As always, if you've missed any of the episodes of the Addictions Podcast, be sure to check out our website at addictionspodcast.wordpress.com and follow us on Facebook. It's facebook.com/addictionspodcast. We also have a new email address where you can send questions and comments and whatever else. And you can find that new email address at theaddictionspodcast@gmail.com. Don't forget that you can follow us on Twitter as well. We are at addictionscast, or you can visit www.twitter.com/addictionscast. And as always, never quit quitting.
Then you smashed your only car. You aren't what you are really. You missed it by so damn far. Your head feels like it's in a blender, and you hate to see the dawn. Your stomach says return to sender after the buzz is gone. Your Sunday